Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, I hope you're having a great holiday, not just week, it's like 2 weeks spread out over 2 weeks. Hope you're enjoying it. Stay with us for my special interview with U.S. Senator Pat Toomey. Let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, as the year ends, I want to thank our viewers all over the state. In 2014 on WGAL in the Susquehanna Valley, we had more adult viewers than any Sunday national or state commentary program. Go figure that. And I think it's largely because of the guests that we've had. It's largely also because we keep it conversational. No screaming, no shouting. We want you to enjoy the guests that we have. And joining me, and I'm delighted that we have U.S. Senator Pat Toomey on the program. He's been on the show before. Senator, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Well, look, let's talk before I want to do a whole bunch of things, but before I do this, I have to ask you, a couple weeks ago, we have Sony hacking. They decide they cancel the release of this comedy called The Interview. Lots of reaction. People saying, why would they do that? Terrible precedent. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a very disturbing precedent because what it shows is that hackers with evil intentions can get their way from a very large U.S. corporation, a subsidiary of a Japanese, but nevertheless. Right. So it's a very disturbing precedent. I mean, I can understand why the executives at Sony would be very nervous about releasing this, but I think this really underscores our vulnerability, to cyber attacks. And we've been very conscious and aware of this with respect to our financial services sector, to our energy sector and the power grid and the dangers there. But I think this is the wake-up call that it goes well beyond that.
Yeah.
Frankly, I think one of the best things we could do in the short run in terms of an immediate response is to find a way, any way we can, to disseminate this movie throughout North Korea. I would have it dubbed with the Korean language and let that government know. Yeah. But the problem, of course, is people who can't afford a DVD player and don't have access to the internet. I'm not sure how we could achieve that.
Sure. But, I mean, in some ways, don't we ultimately have to deal with this rogue regime, North Korea, in some way?
So, in the short run, this is about the American government's ability to influence the Chinese, because the Chinese prop up this regime. Yeah. And in the longer run, I think it's about having a strategy that will encourage the people of North Korea to rid themselves of the misery of this dictatorship.
Well, we're going to talk about bipartisanship in a few minutes, but I want to get on to another subject first. But at least it's one thing where Republicans and Democrats and the president seem to be agreeing that Sony should have aired the film, not, they're taking literally the trailers down. They're removed. They've removed by the time this airs. They will remove all of it, and it is scary for this reason. I mean, if that's the case, why can't we be blackmailed for almost anything?
Well, that's just it, right?
The First Amendment. Where's the First Amendment?
And any major company can be threatened, and that's what led to this. It was a threat of attack that caused them to pull this. So how hard is it to predict that other hackers from probably all around the world are going to make similar threats? And we can't be shutting down our economy and our society because of this.
All right, the Republicans now have, who knows in the Senate where sometimes you need 60 votes, as you know as well as anybody.
Yes.
Often you need 60.
Yes.
You have 54 now.
Right.
Increased majorities in both chambers where you take over the Senate.
Right.
You've talked a bit. You've talked more and more about ways in which Congress can work with the president. Go through a couple of them and outline where you think there's, in the next 2 years where the Congress can work with the president.
And let me step back just a second and look at what's happened in the last few years. Senator Reid, in control of the Senate, completely shut the Senate down. There was almost no legislation permitted on the Senate floor. There were never amendments allowed. It was absolutely closed for business, really. That's really not much of an exaggeration, Terry. So I think what we need to do is reopen the Senate. And let's start with legislation that we know has bipartisan support, and let's start moving a whole series of bills that are designed to strengthen economic growth and job creation. I mean, there's a long list that many of us have in our outbox. Senator Reid never allowed to get on the Senate floor. So I would start, for instance, with let's approve the Keystone Pipeline. We know there's broad public support, there's bipartisan support in Congress. And when that gets on the Senate floor, let's open it up to energy-related amendments. I think we should be exporting liquid natural gas. It would be terrific for Pennsylvania. It would be good for geopolitics. I want to offer an amendment if the underlying bill doesn't.
Potential competition from New York, since they're now
since
continue
they've
to
foolishly taken themselves out of the equation. That's unbelievable to me, but that's their decision. And there's other things we should do. I mean, we shouldn't have this ethanol mandate, which is counterproductive for the environment. It's more expensive. It runs up food prices. That's an amendment that I want to make some progress on. So there's all kinds of things we can do in the energy space, but the first bill out of the blocks, I think, is likely to be approving the Keystone Pipeline. There's a whole series of things that I hope we'll be able to accomplish to diminish the worst effects of Obamacare. I'm in favor of
repeal it.
Well, I'm in favor of repealing it. But the president's not going to sign a bill, and we probably can't get 6 Democrats to join us. Although every Republican would support complete repeal. So while I will ultimately, I want to see us repeal this. In the meantime, I'd like to do what we can. So one of the things we did actually in the funding bill we just passed is we, at least for next year, the duration of the funding bill, taxpayers won't be on the hook to bail out insurance companies related to Obamacare. We could repeal the medical device tax. There's a number of things we can do.
All right, I'm chatting with U.S. Senator Pat Toomey. We're going to take a break. We'll continue with Thor. I want to ask him about bipartisanship, his work with Senator Casey. We'll do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, well, I'm chatting with Senator Pat Toomey. We're delighted to have this senator with us. We're talking about a variety of issues that are coming before Congress. And one of the things that I talked with the senator about over the years was bipartisanship. And this host tends not to get involved in issues. I'm a neutral on this program, but I think one of the advantages in having Senator Toomey and Senator Casey is they may disagree on issues, but they work together. There's no bomb throwing, no name threats. I think that's wonderful that you and Senator Casey can, have reached an accommodation on many things. Yeah, well, I have a lot of respect for Senator Casey, and I think he's a delight to work with. Yeah. He's a really good guy. Now, we completely disagree on many things, but it's a waste of time to focus on where we disagree. What we look for is where can we find common ground. So Senator Casey and I have worked together on a lot of things for Pennsylvania, whether it's deepening the channel for the Port of Philadelphia for the sake of commerce, or whether it's long-term contracts for some of the military contractors we have in Pennsylvania so they can have the assurance that they can keep their workforce and we have job security for those folks. Or the judges, in the 4 years since I've been in the Senate, Senator Casey and I, working together every step of the way, have gotten 14 people through the entire process for the federal district
for District 2 on the circuit court, the Court of Appeals. That's right. And it's a rigorous process. We have our respective designees on committees for each of the 3 districts. They interview and vet the candidates, then we recommend them to the White House. The White House nominates. We usher them through the confirmation process. I don't know, Terry, if there's another state in the union that's had more judges confirmed in the last few years than we've had. And they're terrific men and women that I'm very proud of. And wasn't there something down in the Gettysburg National Park? Yeah, so that was very recently. We were able to get the historic train station where Lincoln arrived to deliver the Gettysburg, from which he delivered the Gettysburg Address, and a parcel of land that was privately owned and donated. Both of these now have been incorporated into the national park. That is that's a national gem, the Gettysburg National Park, and we've we've expanded it in a very sensible way at no cost to taxpayers, and we did that by working together on that legislation. Yeah. Well, one of the other things that we hear an awful lot about, and it's not just sort of the fallout from the predator Jerry Sandusky and what happened as a result of that, but
it's also some work that you've done in Congress on, to protect children in the classroom.
Right.
We, by the way, we've done some programming on it. We've had some advocates come on and talk about some of the legislation that occurred in our state on reporting, as you know, who gets to report and who's responsible. Some of that was a little, I won't say vague, but they've expanded the reporting, which I think most of us agree is a good thing. So talk a little bit about what work you've been doing in that area.
So what I discovered is a shockingly high number of ongoing arrests of teachers and other school employees being arrested for sexual misconduct with the kids that they're supposed to be protecting and teaching. So far this year, we're up to almost 450 people across the country have been arrested from schools for sexual misconduct with these kids. Pennsylvania ranks number 2 of all 50 states. So I've got a bill that's designed to require a uniform, tough background check mechanism where you have to check both the state and the federal background checks for criminals, right? We want to make sure we identify anyone who's got a conviction of having violent or sexual abuse of kids. And I don't want those people being hired. And we need to find out. We've got holes in this background check system. And we've got a terrible practice where sometimes these perpetrators are known to school officials, but there's not enough evidence to actually try them. Right. And so instead what some have done is write them a letter of recommendation and send them off to some other school. So it's called passing the trash, right? And it's outrageous because we know this person is going to then find victims in another school, but this has happened as a way to make it someone else's problem. Anyway, I think it should be banned. I think parents ought to have confidence that when they put their kids on the school bus, they're going to a safe environment.
All right, I'm chatting with Senator Toomey. We're going to run to a break. There's some activities the Senator's been involved in concerning job creation. I want to ask him about Startup Jobs Innovation Act. The economy, jobs still remains by far the single most important issue that folks in our country care about. And even though unemployment is down, as everyone knows, lots of people still dropped out of the workforce. Matching training and backgrounds with the available jobs. This is an important problem. I'm going to ask the Senator about that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Senator Pat Toomey is my special guest. Senator, jobs, the economy, still the number one issue. We can talk about foreign affairs maybe if you want a little later. Voters of our country, as a pollster, as you know, not excited, still think moving in the wrong direction, state and federal government. What do we have to do to get the economy moving?
The voters are right. I mean, what they understand, intuitively or otherwise, is that this recovery has been really weak compared to past recoveries. The unemployment rate has come down, but a big part of that is because people have just dropped out of the workforce. They've given up. So it's not as bad as it was, but it's nowhere near where it should be. In my view, the huge avalanche of new regulations coming out of Washington easily explains a big part of this. It's Obamacare that's certainly costing us jobs and certainly costing workers hours. It's Dodd-Frank is making it harder for small banks to lend money to small businesses on Main Street, and that's a huge problem. You have an EPA that is very aggressively going after industrial America in almost all respects. So the combined weight of all of these regulations are just making it really hard to create more jobs. So the most constructive thing I think we could do is just push back on some of the excesses and free up this economy to do what the American economy normally does, which is grow rapidly. What that does is it creates demand for workers, upward pressure on wages. Rising wages means a higher standard of living for our workers.
You've co-sponsored a piece of legislation. I guess you'll reintroduce it now, the new Congress, with Senator Menendez that has to do with the tax code and companies. What's that about?
Yeah, so one of the things that encourages small businesses to invest more, which allows them to grow and hire more workers, is allowing them to deduct the cost of new items that they purchase. So if, I used to be in the restaurant business. If I needed to go out and buy a new oven or buy a new walk-in freezer, anything that I needed to buy that's an expensive outlay. And unfortunately, under our tax code, you can't deduct the full cost, even though you had to pay it. You only could take it over time. It's called depreciation, right? So the more a business is able to expense that when the expense actually occurs, the more it encourages that investment and the growth that goes with it. So that's the bill that I have with Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey.
And you're going to reintroduce it?
I will, absolutely will reintroduce it. I have several others, but I think that's one of the things we could do to help encourage stronger economic growth.
Yeah. What about, we'll get into the details of these trade agreements that, have been languishing, what free trade agreements with some, just briefly, what?
Yeah, the administration, the trade negotiator, and I've spoken with our trade rep, Mike Froman, recently, and he believes he's very close to a trade agreement with the Pacific Agreement, right, which includes the countries around the Pacific. They'll need Trade Promotion Authority to pass, I think, which gives the president the authority to finalize an agreement and then bring it back to Congress for an up or down vote without Congress going back and reopening every individual piece. So this is something the president has said he wants, but so far we haven't seen him put any political capital into getting it done. It's an area that we might be able to get done, and what it'll do is it'll enhance export opportunities for Pennsylvania companies.
All right, when we come back from this break, I want to ask Senator Toomey about some of the things that the president has done, immigration, the executive order, but also the Cuba trade, opening formal diplomatic relations, something that's not existed since the pre-Castro days. I'll ask the senator about that and see how much time we have for other things.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
We're back with Senator Pat Toomey, my special guest this week. All right, Senator, let's talk a little bit. The immigration executive order, lots of blowback from that, particularly from the Republicans on the Republican side of the aisle. Is there, some Republicans have said, we get back in session, we're going to do something about it. What realistically can be done?
Well, I think we have to do something about it. In my view, just put aside the policy. What you think of it. The president doesn't have the authority to do this unilaterally. Our system is very clear. To pass a new law requires Congress's involvement. And the president gets to sign it or veto it, but he doesn't get to unilaterally make the law. Mm-hmm. And what he's done here is the equivalent of making a law. So I think it's incumbent upon us to say, oh, no, Mr. President, it doesn't work that way. What we just passed was a funding bill that funds the entire government through the end of September, except the part that would implement this. And look, I think we're going to have a fight over this.
In February, the funding ends, and that's where
And that's a better way for us to resolve a dispute with the president over a narrow, particular area where the dispute occurs, rather than have this on-off switch where we're going to shut off the whole government if we disagree with the president or flip it back on if we agree. Now, of course, there was no alternative when Harry Reid wouldn't allow us to do the individual spending bills sequentially, and it was all balled up in one big giant. This is part of why we've got to go back to a normal, ordinary process of funding the government.
So you think February will be, quote, D-Day for the funding for Homeland Security? It goes away, and that's the where you get into the immigration debate.
I think that's where we're going to have this. Now, mind you, I think separately we can and should pass legislation. We should pass a border security bill and send it to the president.
Yeah.
The president said he's for that, so let's send him a bill. I think we should lift the cap on H-1B visas dramatically, in my book. Send that to the president. So I don't know how he'll respond to those things.
Talking about jobs, there's a real division on what the president has done, end the embargo on Cuba, restore trade, whatever that means. We don't know a lot yet about what it means. Business community leaders, on the record, the president of the National Chamber of Commerce says it's a good thing. Yet people in the political community on both sides of the aisle, Senator Menendez, you point out, Cuban,
very opposed.
Yeah. What's
So there's a lot of moving parts here, right? The prisoner exchange, for instance. I'm very glad that we got Americans out of Cuban prisons, and we had to give up some Cuban convicts, from here. Yeah. And that might be acceptable so that we could get our people back home. So I'm sympathetic to that. The president's been very vague about the changes in business, and he can't lift the embargo unilaterally. That clearly requires an act of Congress. What I find most questionable about what the president has done is reestablishing diplomatic relationships with a communist regime that is a dictatorial regime, systematically denies its people any meaningful freedom, has engaged in no reforms at all, and yet here we are bestowing our recognition on this government. And what did we get? What did the people of Cuba get for that?
Well, the human rights, remember, one federal government report said most of the human rights violations in that country are perpetrated by the government.
Absolutely, and they're systematic. And so, I really wonder what the president was thinking when he gives the imprimatur of the United States government to a regime that is this terrible to its people. That strikes me as a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting as a pollster, when I looked at the polls, something like 3/4 of the American people were born post-Castro, but 2/3 of Congress pre-Castro. We could have this division, between the voters who, not quite tied into it in the same way, not emotionally connected. And we'll have to see how that all plays out.
Well, and I think the U.S. recognition is a big deal, and no doubt the Cuban government wants to use that to try to go after multinational funding, which they desperately need from whether it's the IMF or the World Bank or whatever. And look, I just don't think we've seen the kind of reforms to justify that kind of outreach from the world community. This is a really bad regime.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And, the Cuban population, again, sort of split demographically, could have a big effect, some are saying, on the presidential election in Florida. At any rate, I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Busy guy. We appreciate your time. All right, again, have a great holiday season. It's coming to an end, but we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.